So for the second half of the workshop, we're going to start with Mike Korchinsky, who's the founder and president of Wildlife Works.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming to the event. So this morning you hopefully got a refresher on where we think things are with the market and how we think things are going to develop now as we move forward, hopefully with the impetus of the Paris Agreement propelling us forward. So, and a lot of those market projections are all in the form of pay for performance, are moving into an environment where the payment that happens for emission reductions is only going to come after the fact when they're delivered. And so I thought it would be interesting maybe to get a little in the weeds in one of the leading programs in this space, which is in the, believe it or not, you probably don't believe it, but in the Congo, in the DRC, which is involved in the FCPF Carbon Fund as one of the pipeline countries, and has a program in which a lot of the issues of how you design a larger scale program to make pay for performance viable as a tool to propel performance is occurring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pay for performance with that experience in mind, so you have something to keep in mind if you're involved in another country. I know most of you are involved in RED somewhere, and so that because we think it's very important that this gets done right in the next year or 2 years before the compliance markets start, that the national governments get these designs right for how do you actually implement a pay for performance system at large scale. Projects have been used to pay for performance. The private sector operates on pay for performance in general, so pay for performance is less alien to us, but what we found as a private sector actor going into a national program in the DRC is that the governments aren't necessarily as used to pay for performance, and so it creates a series of challenges. So I was told though by somebody who has a kid that it's a very similar principle. Okay, so the basic idea of pay for performance is that why do you need it in the first place? Well, you need it because there's a finite amount of funding, and you want to make sure that funding goes towards achieving the results that you're trying to achieve. Right? You don't have a lot of money to waste. Just throw out every idea you have. So the idea is if you have a finite amount of money, you put that money out there and say, I want the performance that I need in order for the money. Okay, so it's kind of like the dog, right? I got a treat in my hand. I want you to sit down. You're going to get the treat, right? So that works great. Dog sits down, give him the treat. Dog doesn't sit down, don't give him the treat, right? So very fundamental. Surprising how many people take time to come to grasp with that principle. But so the idea is that people and organizations do what they're paid to do, generally, and so that's the fundamental, and that rewarding good behavior reinforces good behavior. So if there's another dog over there, sees the other one sit down and get a treat, he's going to sit down and get a treat, right? That's the basic idea here. So, and it really is almost that simple to begin with. The concept has to be that you have to design a system where you tell the participant what they're expected to do and what reward they're going to get for performance, and then if they do it, you give them the reward. And if they don't do it, you don't give them the reward. And it really is that simple, but actually implementing that in a jurisdictional RED program ends up not being quite so simple. So here's the idea behind pay performance. The first thing is to create a common vision of success and communicate it at all levels. So this is relevant when you're talking about a national scheme in a country that has complexity. You've got national issues, you've got regional issues, and you've got local issues. So if you're going to implement pay for performance, you need to have a common vision of this what the performance success is, and then you need to communicate that at all levels. And then, more importantly, you need to align the incentive at different program levels for the same outcome. You can't pay somebody at one level for one outcome and pay somebody at another level for a different outcome. You're going to have a disconnect. Right? So all the design of an incentive system has to link. And this is very corporate, I have to say, sorry, but companies took a while to figure this out, actually. And that if you pay the CEO for one set of results and you pay everybody else in the company for another set of results, the company doesn't generally do very well. So you have to pay everybody, you have to align the incentive schemes for people so that they're all aiming towards the same definition of success. And that's very true in a RED pay for performance system. And then the third thing is that at each level, you need to design the incentives system to be relevant for that stakeholder at that level. You can't reward or fail to reward somebody for something they have no control over. That's a fundamental. If the dog can't sit, he can't control whether he gets the reward or doesn't get the reward. So you have to make sure that when you're designing at different levels, that you're designing the incentive system so that it's relevant for the stakeholder. And again, that's very important whether you're talking about a community within a forest village or the national government. You're rewarding them generally for behaviors that lead to the same outcome of reduced emissions, but you have to reward them for performance at the level they're at that they can control. Otherwise, they don't get the link between their own actions and the reward. So that's a key to pay for performance, is that you're designing the system relevant to each stakeholder. And then a big one in national programs and even jurisdictional programs is the idea of perverse incentive. So oftentimes you'll see that you're not getting the behavior you want because there's something else that's getting in the way. So I'm trying to get my dog to sit with a treat over here, and then somebody over there is squeaking a toy, right? So the squeaking of the toy over there is stopping my dog from sitting. Well, in the national programs, the equivalent of that is I'm trying to get everybody to reduce emissions over here with the incentives that I'm offering, but over here I have another legislation that's actually rewarding people more for destroying forest. So either for a number of reasons. So pioneer schemes are very common in developing countries where people are allowed to own land if they make it productive, and generally speaking, humans' definition of productive means no forest. So that's a perverse scheme where you have a program that's trying to reward people to reduce emissions, but you're providing them with different rewards that might be more attractive to them to increase emissions. So you have to really look for within the legislative environment of the country, you have to look for perverse incentive and try and remove those. So those are just some very fundamental principles. And now we're going to look at an example here. And this is an example that was mentioned earlier. This is Mai-Ndombe, which is a province in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Down in the bottom left, you can see Kinshasa, which is the capital city of the DRC. Some of you can see it down here. There. This is it's about 12 million people, an area that has been completely deforested. The edge of the Congo Basin forest is here. So this is the southwest edge of the Congo Basin forest. This all used to be forest, now gone. And then similarly at the coast, in this side of Kinshasa was also forest and also gone. Not that recently. So this is the frontier of the forest, and this province represents both the frontier of deforestation on this side of the Congo. There's another frontier on the east side and another one on the north, of course. And so this is an important province for the DRC as a way to try and stem the deforestation moving from Kinshasa out into the forest, based on the need for forest services and wood and fuel and land moving out of Kinshasa. So the reference level for this program, and this is actually a real number, the reference level for this program is 48 million tons a year. So the historical average emissions on an annual basis is 48 million tons. This is an area of 13 million hectares. So I'm told that's the same size as England. Don't want to insult anybody from England, but I'm told that's the same size as England. Or 4 times the size of Belgium, I was also told, to make the English feel better. Okay. Sorry if there's any Belgians in the house. But that's the reference level. So if you're a program manager, you have this reference level. Okay, fantastic. We did all this work. Literally lots and lots and lots of work to come up with an agreed reference level. And there's error bars on a reference level, and that's going to be another interesting thing, but lots of work. So then, here we go. So now, so the next question is, next step of the process is you have to do MRV. So now this is the next stage for the DRC. The program began officially January 2017. So its first MRV is coming up. It hasn't happened yet. So it's going to have its first MRV. So from this point forward, this is hypothetical, right? As just to illustrate the issue. So you have a reference level of 48 million tons in an area of 13 million hectares. And you have a performance of 45 million tons of emissions. So let's assume that we measured our emissions and we had a number of 45 million tons. So it's reduced by 3 million tons. That sounds like a great thing. Where? And this is an area the size of England. Where did that performance occur? And don't I need to know where that occurred? Don't I need to know where it occurred so that I can actually reward where it occurred? because some of the people and some of the programs within that 13 million hectares were engaged and were trying to make things happen and did make things happen, presumably, and some were not engaged and were not trying to make things happen and were not participating in the program. So it's, at this level, it's very difficult for the program management to know what to do. All they have is 48 million tons as a reference level and 45 million tons as a performance level. So, but MRV is almost always spatial. So when you do MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification, so the monitoring part, which is monitoring your actual emissions, is almost always done spatially. Satellite images, aerial survey, somebody is using some way of understanding where emissions are occurring. It's not a thumb suck at the top. It's usually down to not meter level, but certainly within the pixel level of a satellite image, for example, which the lowest resolution there would be 30 meters by 30 meters. So you know whether deforestation occurred within a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel if you're using something like Landsat. And if you're using something more high resolution, you might know down to 3 meters by 3 meters whether deforestation occurred. So you really have a view of where the emissions actually occurred. So here we have, you know, the actual emission picture of that. So that 45 was 20 over here in this landscape, 15 down there. Again, these are hypothetical numbers to illustrate the point. And then 5 million over there. So, all right, great, that's fantastic. Which one's good and which one's bad? Is 20 good? Emissions, it sounds bad, right? It's high out of the 45. And 15 and 5 sounds great. Sounds like not that many emissions. But what if the reference level, the 48 million ton reference level, was allocated at the same level, spatially? If you don't do that, how do you know which one's good and which one's bad? You just had the 48 million ton reference level, and then you had this much more granular detail for measured emissions, but how do you know which one's good and which one's bad unless you have the reference level divided up spatially in the same way? So if you have the reference level divided up spatially, now you can see that actually 20 is great, because the historical emissions in that area were 25 million tons a year. And so they've actually reduced their emissions by 5 million tons a year, coming in at 20 million tons. Whereas that one over there that looked good at 15, their reference level was only 12 million. So they've actually increased emissions in that area by 3 million tons a year. This is a really important point in the design process and in the debate we had within the national program, is you can't manage these programs with one number. You can't manage them with one reference level, you can't manage them with one emission level. You can compensate at the top, that's not the issue here. Somebody can still contract for the results that occur at the top, but you can't really manage the program unless you understand this detail, because you want to know where to reward and where the rewards are leading to performance and where not to reward, because performance isn't happening. And you need to know that at a level below the national level for sure. Even in a place like Costa Rica, which is not very big. But in a place like the DRC or in Indonesia or in Peru, where you have very complex systems. So now let's look at the reality of a complex system. This is actually a spatial map of the Mayen-Dombe province. So again, red shows deforestation historically, green shows remaining forest. So you've got a very complicated map of historical deforestation and remaining forest. And so it's not really even about allocating 4 numbers that I had in my example. You actually really have to figure out where are the stakeholders that actually control the performance. It's not really the national government in this case. I mean, there's some things, of course, that the national government can do. They have to run the program efficiently. They have to provide the incentive systems. They have to provide the design of the overall system and monitoring. But in the end, they're not on the ground making decisions day to day about whether trees live or die. In an environment like this, that's being done by logging companies. It's being done by communities. It's being done by commodity agricultural companies. These are the people who are making decisions. And so, and you need to be able to divide up this environment. So over here we have, these are all logging concessions, right? So you can see that logging concession is an area where deforestation, surprise, surprise. It's an area where people are paid to cut down logs, so some deforestation happens in those areas, right? This is a conservation concession. That's a road that had been going in to between the one end and the other, and then this is sort of cleanup of forest that has been fragmented for a long time, so that's why the deforestation was so heavy down here. But you can just see how spread out it is. And so you need to figure out within your program, where are the units of accountability? Where are the community groupings? Where are the territories that you can aggregate together so that you can create a sensible balance between too much complexity and enough complexity. You need enough complexity to be able to ensure that you're rewarding the right groups for the right performance that is leading to an overall reduction in emissions. But you can't have too many to make it too complicated to manage. You can't take it down to the village level, for example, or you'd never get anything done because there are tens of thousands of villages in this landscape. So you have to find an appropriate level of aggregation. And then it's not that complicated to actually manage the accounting. That was one of the questions that people raise is well, isn't this complicated? The carbon accounting is very complicated. Well, this spreadsheet has 4 columns, right? That's not terribly complicated. So column number 1 over here is, so here's your stakeholders. You might have a bunch. We've in your landscape, depending on how complicated your landscape is. In the DRC, there's one of these, us, for now, and there's a bunch of these, 18 of these, and then there's thousands of these, but we're going to try and aggregate them together into meaningful groups over time. And so the idea is that they first get allocated a reference level, and this is another key learning here. I'd like to think that the reference level process is purely technical. It's not. It's not because, and the reason it's not, you can't just take the historical emissions and say, all right, this area had these historical emissions, therefore we're going to give you that reference level if you're in this area. What if there's no forest left there? If there's no forest left there, you're giving somebody a historical reference level that they're going to earn against, and they have no way of having further emissions because there's no forest left to cut down. So they're going to earn for doing nothing, essentially. In that case, they're not going to have to actively do anything to reduce emissions because there's no forest left to result in emissions. So it's not purely a technical process. You're always going to have to take the historical reference level, look at the remaining forest, look at where you think the threat is coming from for all the different reasons and the different things, and then allocate. Thank you, Michael. And then allocate that reference level to the appropriate stakeholder, again, with the principle that only allocate them what they can manage and what they're responsible for. So, and it's a zero-sum game. Eventually, it all has to get either allocated or reserved. So some is always going to be reserved, probably for the government, so that they can't, if they can't allocate all of it, because they can't figure out who to assign accountability for, then the government will hold on to a portion of that reference level in order to be able to earn from overall performance that is not attributable to any one stakeholder within the landscape. So this column here is assuming that we have an allocated reference level now. And then here's the monitoring. So here's we're monitoring their emissions. So every 2 years in the DRC program, they're going to monitor emissions. They would do it every year if it were easier and cheaper, but the cost of monitoring is still quite high. So there's a trade-off between how often you monitor and how often you want to get paid. And then, so here's the stakeholder performance. It's just this column minus this column. Very straightforward. So now you know who actually performed within the overall program area. So you know where those emission reductions actually came from. And then over here, it gets a little bit more complicated if, in some circumstances, you might imagine that this number could be less than 0. In other words, if a logging concession was given 1 million tons of historical emissions and actually had 2 million tons of emissions in a given year, then their number would be negative. Right? They would actually have increased emissions by 1 million tons. And so then you get into a situation where the sum at the bottom here, 10 million, would be less than the sum of the individual positive performers. So there are some additional complexities, which we won't get into now. But the basic management tool is just this spreadsheet that shows who did what where. And the premise here for anybody that wants to participate in a larger scale program is that you need to be you need to work with your national government, regional government to get a reference level that is assigned to you, that is based on the area of forest, the carbon stocks of forest that you're responsible for, and then the amount of effort you're making to reduce. And if you do, then you can expect. So here's the example I was just talking about. Here's where it gets a bit more complicated, the challenge of offsetting. So here you might have engaged communities and private sector actors that reduced 5 million tons within the program, so they all bought into the idea and did positive action and they reduced. But you might have a logging concession and some unengaged communities over here that didn't buy in and that increased their emissions against their share of the reference level, right? So now the sum, which is what's going to get paid for by a program that's coming from the top down, the sum is less, the 2 million is less than 5 million, which was the sum of the people who performed. So now you have a problem because the treat that you were promising these communities and these private sector actors is a lot smaller when it arrives. You hold out a big treat, you deliver a little treat. Because, and this is one of the challenges that needs to be addressed in the design of these programs, is how are you going to figure out how to stay with the basic idea of pay for performance, make sure you're rewarding people, telling them what they're going to get, and then giving them what they earn in an environment where someone else's performance out of their control is reducing the amount that's available to reward them. So this is one of the things that that one of the panelists is going to talk about, is some options that we've started to discuss for how you might solve this problem, which is almost certainly going to happen. There's almost no scenario in a large-scale RED program where this doesn't happen, where somebody doesn't underperform and somebody doesn't overperform in a complex landscape. So this is definitely going to happen. So the number of options for how you deal with that need to be addressed. And then just in case, because we are a RED project developer and I'm proud of it for that matter, but just in case you think this is just about projects, it's not. So this idea of nesting is really about how do you aggregate results from actually the thing that happened to a higher level for whatever reason you want to aggregate. And so you want to aggregate because you worry about leakage, or you want to aggregate because you want to be supportive of the UN FCCC at a national level. So these are aggregations, right? And so, but aggregations, and this is a hard concept for a lot of these folks at the UN FCCC to realize, an aggregation is an abstraction. The reality is what's happening on the ground. That's the reality. The reality is that hectare of forest that disappeared. Everything else is an abstraction, and it's an abstraction based on how you want to manage the complexity of your environment. And it's not just about projects. So here's our project over here. We're the only one that has a reference level right now in the Mine Dombe, because we're the ones who helped them figure out how to design this thing, and they gave us one first. But we've told them that they need to be willing to allocate reference levels to all these communities that are now stepping up and saying they want to participate in the program, and to all the logging companies, more importantly, because the logging companies, we know there are going to be emissions in the logging companies, so they can't opt out of the program because we know there are going to be emissions there. So they have to have a reference level because they need some incentive to try and log efficiently, to log sustainably, to reduce the impact of their logging. And to do that, they should have a reference level as well. So here's the nesting that happens up to the subnational program in the province of Mine Dombe. But that's an aggregation. Here's another aggregation. Mine Dombe is only one of 25 provinces in the DRC. They don't all have forest, but is one of about 10 that have lots of forest. So when those reference levels come along, guess what? The Mine Dombe program has been moving along nicely, getting rewarded for its performance. It's brought up all the performance of the underperformers down below by example, because they're paying the people who are performing and the other people want to come along and perform and get paid. And then all of a sudden, boom, Equateur province comes on stream. And they're just at the very beginning of their process. So they suck, pardon my French. And so their performance is bad in the first couple of years. And so now, guess what? At the next level of aggregation, the national level, their performance, this new province, is now offsetting the province of Mine Dombe. So Mine Dombe has been going along nicely, earning money, but now at a national level, that's being offset by another province that comes on stream that is struggling to perform. And they came on stream because they saw the benefits that Mine Dombe got. And so you can't all of a sudden start penalizing Mine Dombe and say, well, now there's no money to go around, because it's going to stall the whole process at that level if you do, because their expectation, these new provinces that come on, is that they're going to be able to earn the way Mine Dombe earned. And if they all of a sudden see Mine Dombe's not earning anymore because of their action, then it kills the process. So somehow you got to solve that problem with that aggregation. And by the way, even at the national level, if you figure it all out for forests, in the forest reference level at a national level, now you have this thing called an NDC. Right, so the forests are now going to get rolled up into the national contribution with energy and with transport, and so forests might be going great, and you have all this reward mechanism for forests. But then if somebody turns off the tap and says, "Oh, hang on a second, you just installed a diesel generator at the coast. That's the end of your forest money for a while." So this is a problem of aggregation. It's not a problem of projects. It's a problem of aggregation. And a clever design, an intelligent design, will understand the different levels that you want to aggregate to, and will understand how you create the right mechanisms for reward at each level.
Hi, I'm Thomas Spear. I work for Shell on their carbon trading strategy. this is not supposed to be a loaded question, bearing in mind that I work for Shell or anything, try and separate it from that. But throughout history we've seen the resource curse affect many developing countries and developed ones as well. You know, that comes in many guises, one of which could be conflicts over resources and so on. I just wonder if there are many concerns over the unintended consequences of, you know, trying to tap the resources of RED projects in a place like DRC and trying to engage all these tens of thousands of villages, as you put it, across the landscape, and in some way split the value of that resource down in a fair way that avoids conflict.
No, it's an excellent question. Again, one of the things that we find, so I'll give two views of it. One view, which is we in the dialogue at the national level and even at the international level, you often hear people in the government say things like, but how would you ever know who's responsible in order to be able to reward the right people? Or how do you know what the drivers of deforestation are within the region? And so you have this view that the national and international people take because they don't actually go to the forest in their own countries very much. And so when you actually go to the forests in the regions, it's very obvious who is responsible for the deforestation in those areas, and it's very obvious who has an influence in whether that could stop or not. And there are often multiple actors. It's not straightforward, but it's obvious. And so one of the things we hear a lot is, well, how do you know who's responsible and how do you make sure you're rewarding the right people? Well, it's not that hard if you go out there and engage. But one of the things that and we also hear this idea in some countries, developing countries, that if you start rewarding one community, are you not going to suck all the people from another community into that community to try and start sharing in the benefits? And again, that's sort of a lack of understanding of the mobility of forest communities. They just don't pick up and move 500 miles across the country because they heard another person they wouldn't hear, but because another group had earned money. So we find that the actors are much more stable within a landscape. It's not that hard to figure out who to reward, and you're not going to get that much competition for that reward once you're there. I think it's more complicated when you think about the competition, let's say, between palm oil, for example, or a commodity. I don't want to pick on palm oil necessarily, but another use of the landscape that is entrenched, and conservation of forests, which we're all there. You definitely can create conflict by wanting to, for example, support an indigenous community's rights to maintain their forest. And rewarding them for wanting to. We have this example in a project we're working on in Brazil, where there's an indigenous community that's decided they want to protect their forest and they want to benefit from it financially through a RED mechanism to give them the financial strength to protect their forest. But that's at odds with the commercial interests that want to use that land for cattle and for soy, and so it does, and that is creating more conflict now because, in a way, you're empowering the indigenous community to stand up for themselves with a financial result at the end. So it's not straightforward, but we haven't seen any examples yet where the process of implementing a RED program has created more conflict. The one issue I think is there's a timing issue. That's one really key thing. Now somebody else answer, but the timing thing is really important because, for example, if you have a program that's supposed to be 20 years, and because the Carbon Fund is kicking off these programs with investments over 5 years, but these programs are supposed to be semi-permanent in these countries to move forward and continue the decarbonization of their landscapes. So if you have a program that's supposed to be 20 years, you can't focus on everywhere within that process at once for upfront investment. You have to prioritize where you're going to make investments, and that creates some political conflict because you're making a decision to invest in those communities over there at the forest frontier because you think they're the ones that have the most impact on the emissions to begin with, but those communities over there are going to hear about that and they're going to wonder why they didn't get their money, right? So it does create that kind of political conflict on timing of when communities are engaged.
Hi, my name is Morten Rose and I am from Partnerships for Forest, which is a global incubator for finding sustainable business models set up by DFID. I find it fascinating that I hear you explain that there is essentially a market for what you're all working on here, and World Bank is setting and also showing that there is the market. We hear that there are many projects as well. We hear that there is even a standard, a floor price for communities. And my question is more then, what is the missing link to really accelerate the process? And I guess what I'm hearing, which the question that Mike raised in the beginning is, what do you do if you have variances in performance? And you can see that as essentially as being an efficiency in the system, and presumably in the early landscape days you will have huge inefficiencies, and they will go out over time, and performance will be sort of at the same level. So my question to you is essentially the question that I felt that Mike raised, but I didn't quite understand the answers to. What is it that provides that insurance mechanism in the beginning, so that people that are performing are being paid versus the people that are not performing are sort of not hindering the market optimism? And because what it seems to me is that people just need to have that optimism, and this market will accelerate. So what is the insurance that I haven't heard you guys speak so much about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Morten, and welcome, by the way. Thanks for coming. The one idea that was put forward here, which as a design mechanism that has been tested a little bit at the project level, is the idea of a buffer. The idea that you have some kind of across a wide enough range of programs, you would have the successful program, when it's being successful, putting a reserve away for a rainy day, if you like, or for a day when there's variability in performance, and then you could use the buffer to reward because those are real emission reductions that were earned, as opposed to, so you don't have the double counting issue if you use those to reward the actor that was successful differentially from the one that wasn't. So a buffer mechanism is one mechanism that has been discussed. In the other sectors, right, what's one of the perverse things that we do as a society is we tax good things and not bad things. So it costs more money to grow something organically because of all the costs associated with proving you're growing organically, and than it does to grow something not organically, right? So that's the wrong way around. You should be taxing the people who are doing it the way you don't want to do it, and you should be using those taxes to reward the people who you do want to do it. And I think in a way that's another mechanism that could be looked at in some countries that have the capacity to do that. In some of the developing countries involved in REDD+, that will never happen, but in some you could tax the logging company that exceeds its emissions, and you could use that tax of the logging company to reward the performers who didn't, and then not have to sell those emission reductions outside the system in a way that would create the double counting problem. So I think in other sectors there are lots of different mechanisms that have evolved to solve that problem. It seems to be more mysterious in the land use sector for reasons that I'm not entirely sure I understand, other than that many of the countries involved in REDD+ are developing countries that don't have as advanced options for that.